Hello, and welcome to the webinar, Architecting a Secure Hybrid Cloud Using Azure and Microsoft 365 featuring Ascent Solutions. My name is Lori, and I'll be your moderator today. We're broadcasting this webinar through Teams Live event, and the audio can be heard through your PC speakers. Should you have questions for the presenters or need support, please use the Q&A panel located on the right side of your screen. In addition, we thank you for adhering to the Microsoft Digital Code of Conduct that's posted in the chat window. Now on to the presentation. Richard, over to you.
Thank you, Laurie, and welcome everyone. I'm Richard Diver from Microsoft Security, and I get to work with some of the best security experts in the industry and helping develop their great secure solutions for our customers. So today we're going to talk about how to architect a secure hybrid cloud environment using Azure and Microsoft 365. I'm going to be joined by my friends at Ascent Solutions, Tim Zavila, the CTO for Cloud, and Jason Floyd, CTO for Cybersecurity. Guys, I'm looking forward to hearing more about it. So I'm just going to hand this over to you, and you can take it away.
Thanks, Richard. All right, so this is really a topic that Tim and I have been talking quite a bit about, and it's a topic that I think is so relevant for what we're seeing going on. So you can see here on this first portion, we're seeing a couple trends, and I'm going to talk about the first one. Tim's going to talk about the second one. So the first trend is we are seeing ransomware really skyrocket through the roof, both in occurrence, but also in payments. We know about the Colonial Pipeline, we know about JBS. We've seen cities, we've seen companies, we've experienced a significant amount in our own incident response practice where we're seeing customers have this be more and more prevalent. And one of the things that I think is so fascinating to me at this point in time is that I've not yet seen one customer or even read about one that had legitimate cloud backups, who was affected by ransomware. So we all know that that's a great practice. We at least know that having warm, cold, hot strategy is best practice, but it's really not affecting the way that people are architecting their cloud environment. So that's really the first trend, and that is encouraging us to continually push our customers to be able to put their cold backups in the cloud. Yeah, but that's kind of directly in conflict with really the next big trend.
Yeah, so one of the things that we've seen a lot has been all over the news. You probably saw last week. There's just been more and more cloud outages. So last week was Fastly. They had a bug in their software when their customers made a change. Actually, that change, their software took out kind of the whole content distribution network. But if you look at some of the others, Microsoft had one a few months ago. Where some of their authentication systems had issues, underlying background. AWS had a similar one where they had environment, they added front-end capacities, would seem to be relatively little impact, but didn't account for the back-end systems that those would be talking to and overwhelmed them and kind of shut their whole environment down. Google, same thing, made a change, kind of forgot about the underlying old systems when they made the change. So they kind of had this dual system mode affected authentication. But if you look at all the cloud outages, what it really came down to was kind of configuration or user error. So it's kind of two things is really kind of contradict each other, like you're saying, like you want to get into the cloud, but now cloud's starting to have these outages and having bigger and bigger impact on businesses. So as you see here, it just graphic here, almost all the environment, new compute environment is going into the cloud data center. So there's very little on-prem data center work happening anymore. So how do you resolve that, right?
Yeah, resiliency. We talk about it all the time. How do you architect resiliency? I think one of the most fascinating things about this is we've been talking about hybrid environments for a really long time. Our customers have been talking about hybrid environments for a really long time. And it was actually Richard and a bunch of his friends that posed the question to us to be able to say, with that paradigm, you have some recent cloud outages and the ransomware. Underneath that paradigm, how do you architect a secure hybrid? So resiliency is really where it is. But I really think that's easier said than done.
Yes.
And candidly, a lot of people use resiliency in different ways. So this here is ours.
Yeah. So we have some identified keys to that resiliency from a technology perspective. There's obviously the business process pieces too, which we'll talk about in a little bit. But being modernized is really kind of that first piece of being in a resilient environment. You don't want to be running on an old, dated legacy system that leaves you open to outages, not only from the technology but from threat actors as well. So securing that environment, pretty obvious there. Bringing in automation, people don't necessarily think about that from a resiliency perspective, but as much as humans are great, if you look at the recent cloud outages, they're really caused by human input. So the less we can have human input into that and we get more into an automated fashion, the better we're going to be from a resiliency perspective. And then being distributed and having redundancy. Redundancy is probably what most people think of when they do resiliency. They've got underlying dual systems that fail over, things like that. But the distributed aspect, I think, is one that gets left off a little bit too. So we here kind of walk through our customers through a resiliency framework. So this is kind of where we assess people on where they're at. We're always trying to move people further to the right to have the most resilient environment as they possibly can. So when we go into customers, this is kind of what we talk about. Not everybody's going to be way over on to the level 4 aspect. So we do have some customers there, but generally it's, level 0 is like you're kind of for starting off an environment. So you kind of do things a lot of manually. You're all on Prem. You have really no defined disaster recovery or business continuance plan. So if something happens, then you're kind of scrambling. And you may be using an old system. So you might be running Windows XP or Windows Server 2008. You purchased it with a piece of hardware or something like that. So we try and help customers move that up. So as you move up, we bring in some technology like automated patching, cloud productivity tools, and then gradually move that stuff up through the cloud and then introduce more and more levels of automation. And then on the security side, we do some similar things with that too as well, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So the one of our biggest concerns as we move throughout some security maturity is how are they addressing and alerting? One of the things that I think is really common, and we've seen the mindset change quite a bit over the past couple of years, is a lot of security people, candidly, don't really like the opaque nature of the cloud. It's easy. It's harder to manage. It's harder, and really, it's the intention of a SaaS model that you don't have to manage a good amount of the items, but it is naturally opaque. Being somebody who grew up in monitoring, alerting, watching packets go back and forth in a SOC,
yeah.
The opaque nature of the cloud, I think, is a phenomenal opportunity to be able to say, there may be things that I can't do the exact same way, but I get lots more information.
Yeah.
And being able to take all that information and mature that information along the process, to be able to know what you're alerting on, to be able to trigger on things that you and your business care about, is really one of the core capabilities that we're looking for. So how the logging and alerting move into security automation, SOAR activities, that's really the genesis. And you mentioned a little bit about the BCPDR, but I think BCPDR is one of those practices that really span the infrastructure security teams.
Yep.
There's so much about it that exists in the infrastructure team, but the security team really has a great onus for that on their own. And when we think about business continuity, or we think about resilience or general availability of our information, that's a security responsibility. And so it's certainly something that needs to be shared, and we have to care about it, and we have to test it.
Yeah.
Right.
So
this is a great looking framework, and you're right. I mean, how many people actually test their backups before they need them?
yeah.
Bit of an issue there. That's the worst time to try it out, is when you actually need it in the next 2 or 3 hours. So you talked about hybrid architecture. What percentage of your customers would you say today are in a hybrid environment already?
I would say 95 to 99%. I think we as an organization are an exception.
Yeah.
But we started off cloud only, so our intent was to be in the cloud from the get-go. But I don't know any of our customers that actually have just cloud only environment. So
yeah, and I think there's it's a great question, Richard. I think that there's, in addition to that, And it's not only are our customers hybrid by demands of the history of their architecture, but they're hybrid by strategy.
Yep.
This is something that they're setting out to continue to do in a hybrid scenario, to be able to say that there's certain things that we're going to maintain on premises, and there's certain things that we're going to put up in the cloud. And we're seeing that dial move more towards the cloud continually, but none of our customers are exclusively cloud.
Yeah.
Richard, I'm curious if you really see the same thing in your experience.
Yeah, I don't think you can really ignore the cloud. It's at that point now. It used to be I might go, I'm going to look at it, I'll think about it, I'll weigh up my options. A lot of things now are just delivered by the cloud by nature. You know, the idea of buying a server, putting it in a rack. I love those days too, right? They were great days. But now it's just much easier, quicker for the business to understand. I can just turn this thing on, use the latest and greatest capability, and if I don't want it anymore, turn it off and get rid of it. I mean, that flexibility brings a lot of benefits to it.
Yeah.
So I'm interested, guys. Like you said that there's outages in the cloud. Right? We're fully aware that you have to take that. You have to be aware of the risk. You have to understand what it. And that comes back to the business needs to continue whatever the system is. I know a lot of people that love the data centers, and they said it never went down, which is not quite true. It definitely did go down, just maybe in smaller points, so you didn't notice it as much. When the cloud goes down, everybody knows about it, but it comes up pretty quick. So what makes you so confident that migrating to the cloud is actually going to make them more resilient than, say, staying in their on-premises servers where they can see the flashing lights and they can run around and change servers out and things?
Yeah, I think you said it actually, Richard, is that scalability aspect. So as we move through our framework here, one of the key aspects of it is really getting into a distributed model. And the cloud offers an environment that is infinitely more distributed than any organization, say for a couple of Fortune 5 companies, could actually build on their own. So if you look at like Microsoft 365 by its nature, and you have your mailbox on there, you actually don't know where it physically is located within the country that you're in. So having that ability and that distribution of data and redundancy around it offers a great advantage than what you could get on your own. So just kind of thinking kind of frame of reference, if an organization makes $87 million a year as an example, they're talking about $45,000 an hour of impact for downtime. If they run kind of normal business hours. So you think if the cloud's down for 3 hours, well, that's $120,000. We've had some customers that from the resiliency aspect of their on-prem environment have been down for a week or 2 weeks. So now you're starting to get into the millions of dollars of impact. So you look at that financial trade-off too. The cloud is a much better answer.
Yeah, I agree. I recently got asked the question similar to yours, Richard, which was, can I have my cold backups in the cloud? And I turned it really back on the person who asked the question, and I said, not only can you, I absolutely recommend that you have your cold backups in the cloud. And there's a certain amount of warm backups that I would also want in the cloud, but I really have a very minimal cold backups in the cloud for the versioning. Is certainly one of them. For in most cases, cost efficiency, to be able to continually store how much you want. But then it's a measure of the thing that just about nobody does anymore, which we have to get back to the discipline of measuring, like you talked about. Do those if statements. Do you need a daily backup in the cloud? Maybe not. I would argue probably not. It depends on how your business goes. Do you need one that's monthly or quarterly? How do you measure which systems are going to have which cadence in the cloud? Your ERP systems are probably going to be different. How you're maintaining your customer records, your intellectual property, you're probably going to measure that a little bit different than you would some of your accounts payable. So which information and how, on what frequency are you putting in the cloud? And the cloud gives you the versioning that ransomware can't really combat against. It's a phenomenal capability, and candidly, your cloud providers, Microsoft, is taking care of that for you. And you just can't replicate that on premises.
Right, we've seen attackers go after the backups. Right, if you turn off the backups, they can't restore, then you're more likely you're going to get paid as well. So, yeah, interesting perspectives. Now, this modernization is kind of a security initiative, right? We know that it's well, you say it's a security initiative, but it's the security teams are generally the blockers and the pushers back and like, yeah, I've got to worry about my security. Let me validate that in 6 months' time. What's your approach in helping out to make sure that the security teams can actually help with this modernization and benefit from this too?
Good. Yeah. So modernization is a security initiative. I think it's something that we're both pretty passionate about. So, the way that I like to articulate it is I've done a good amount of offensive cyber warfare in my background. So if I'm an attacker, I care about the things that I've done previously, and I care about the things that that I know that I can research. 9 times out of 10, that is legacy technology, or at least old technology. Technology that has proven capabilities that I can target, and I go after those on a repeated basis. So when we say modernization as a security initiative, really that speaks to an attacker's nature on going after things that have published CVEs. So when as an attacker, when I come across really modern technology, or when I do my OSINT and realize that you've outsourced just about everything to a SaaS provider, you're not the slowest buffalo. And I'm going to take my opportunity, and I'm going to take my time and my resources and budget and go after something that is slower than you. And that slower is going to be legacy technology. So when we put together a security roadmap, 9 times out of 10, step 1 is modernize that legacy piece of technology that you as a business think that you still need.
Yeah, the other aspect that brings in the modernization is kind of the traditional technology investment aspect, is unlocking new capabilities to help your business. So by moving on to the latest technology, Office 365 is an example, you're opened up to a number of capabilities that can now help your business. So not only are you making yourself more secure, but now you can start to derive business value and justify the cost of those investments to enable your organization to be more productive or generate new revenue streams, any of those normal traditional business aspects, not just treating security as a cost center where I'm trying to invest in that to prevent something from happening. So one of the things that we've kind of talked through here too is just kind of some of those, what does a level, moving from level 0 to level 1, level 1, level 2 type.
What does it actually look
like? So we have, taking the framework here, this is kind of a basic reference architecture. What we see at customers is probably pretty indicative of our customers at level 0, and Jason will talk to some examples, but it is modernizing is the first thing that we do, and getting automated patching. So pretty basic, pretty simple things that we can have our customers do that really reduce their risk and create a more resilient environment. If they're up to date, they're not exposed to, bugs from software aspect that may cause outages unrelated to the security aspect. And then, like we've talked about a lot, is really that business continuance plan, disaster recovery plan, actually testing it. So, the example that we were talking just on modernization is that migration to Office 365. Microsoft had an Exchange vulnerability that was out there. It really only affected on-prem people. If you were in the cloud and Exchange Online, that was a whole set of patches and security risks that you didn't have to worry about because you were already on a modern platform. So kind of the next step, let's say you've kind of started to modernize those aspects. This is really kind of where you're starting to take advantage of the cloud and make yourself even more resilient. So things like Azure Site Recovery, this is putting your backup and disaster recovery plan into the cloud so that you can recover quicker. So again, we see a lot of customers where they target the backups, like you said, Richard, and if you've encrypted the backups, it's really hard to recover. And then, like Jason said, continuing that evolution into the Microsoft 365 environment, getting things around like offline synchronization and version control, and then the security controls around that for moving to a modern collaboration platform. And then starting with that, security monitoring and centralizing your endpoint management. So you're seeing all the information and data that's coming in, not only from your servers, but from your desktops, end users, mobile devices, things like that. So we have a couple examples that we actually have experienced at customers that obviously the names are obfuscated here, but the scenarios are pretty real. So Jason, if you want to.
Yeah, so this first one was really a very interesting customer example that we have, and we got a call. Really, it's always a Friday night. Yeah. But we got a call on a Friday night from a customer who brand new customer. We hadn't met them. It was really just a cold call that they had a referral to us. And they were hit by ransomware. They had no accounts payable. They had no accounts receivable. Every workstation in their company and every server in their company was locked. And it ended up being a Gregor ransomware, which in December of 19 was brand new. It was an offshoot of a former, but it was a brand new strain. And they had a relatively small manufacturing company, but they had really no ability to fight it, and candidly were ready to shut their doors. Mm-hmm. So they called us and said, we've exhausted everything that we can do. Can you help us? Can you help us recover? So naturally looked for backups. They hadn't been doing any backups. Some of the backups that they had were on premises, all got locked. Yep. And very little was in IaaS. They weren't leveraging. They had OneDrive. They weren't leveraging it. They had Exchange Online. Weren't really leveraging it. And they were absolutely operationally shut down. So this is really the definition of a stage 0 customer. Yeah. For us. And in relatively short fashion, we were able to decrypt. We were able to restore. And we were able to put them on a managed services program to be able to maintain some of that. So
yeah, and they've moved entirely into Microsoft 365 now, and they're running cloud backups. They have moved all their systems from on-prem servers into the cloud. They still have some that are for their ERP, things like that stay there. But that definition of moving up a level and adding these aspects in, and they do regular BCP DR tests, so because we helped them out with that.
Yeah, absolutely. They also implemented Microsoft Defender for endpoint. They implemented Sentinel. Yep. So now we can help them monitor it on a regular basis, stay on top. Not necessarily zero to hero, but they really skipped a handful of steps and phases as they went.
Yeah. So kind of next company that we've kind of did something, they were probably more like a level 1. So they had some stuff, a little bit more mature organization, but you walk through this one too.
Yeah, this one was Doppelpaymer, was the ransomware. Their scenario was actually quite interesting. In their case, they had loads of backups. They had all the backups that they really needed. Unfortunately, their antivirus platform could not trigger on the nested binary that the payload was using. So they would restore. They were on a terrible cycle by the time they called us. They would restore all their servers. 24 hours later, they would get restarted. The ransomware deploy again, and they were in a vicious cycle, and they couldn't eradicate the ransomware. So in this case, they had a handful of problems. They had an antivirus really dated that just really couldn't keep up with a modern signature, but they also didn't have any cold backups. So everything that was warm was continually getting triggered, and they could end up restoring them because they had a pretty good DR solution, but couldn't keep them in place, and therefore had no accounts payable, no accounts receivable. This one really ended in a great feel-good story. We ended up getting invited to a board meeting to explain to their company how we had restored and really what they could do. And this ended in the chairman of the board giving me a hug and telling me that, thank you, you've saved our company. They're a family-owned company, so it was really a great story, great opportunity. But they were probably a level 1, and really had some good things that they had put in place. But really weren't leveraging a lot of any of their modern technology, and had left some things behind, not properly testing, not really leveraging that cloud capability.
Yeah, so we do run into those companies, but I'd say more of them are probably in that level 2 scenario. So what that looks like for us, we start to cross into a little bit different set of technologies. So now we're looking to manage their both on-prem and cloud environments in a single entity. So doing things like Azure Arc and running across. Some of them have even multi-cloud scenarios. So they'll have another cloud system that they'll want to run as a kind of single environment. So starting to think of that their compute environment as a single environment rather than separate data centers. Some our customers just really introduced that automation. So things like, again, starting to take out the human element, infrastructure as code. So I don't actually go mount the ISO and install the virtual machine anymore, or even download the image file from Azure and then run through the configuration. I write the code and the configuration of that and then deploy it, and there's no human element. We're also starting to help these customers start to do some of that network segmentation, split their apps up and bring in a app dev pipeline that's continuous improvement, continuous deployment. So they insert the code at the beginning and then it's automatically deployed, and they really don't have that human involvement. So, and then there's some other security things like PAM that we
I think privilege access management is a phenomenal capability. When we think about defending ransomware, it's almost always going to be two things: that you have good backups and you have MFA. Those two things alone are probably going to stop ransomware in general. And privilege access management, along with MFA, really puts up a wall that I think as a offensive red teamer, that I'm not going to go after someone that's got a PAM. So, this is just in time. This is just enough. There's a lot of phenomenal technologies out there. Azure Active Directory gives you a bunch of phenomenal capabilities to leverage in this space. But this has evolved a significant amount over my time. There was absolutely a time before where you would walk into a relatively mature company and their admins would have 6 accounts.
Yeah.
So this is really eliminating a bunch of that requirement, a lot of that overhead, a lot of the hygiene challenges, and leveraging something that's a lot more modern, and being able to pull those capabilities in. So this is just in time, just enough capabilities, really critical to how we defend all of our systems. And then network segmentation. This is one that I think has grown some legs. And potentially unnecessarily. So, even into heavy microsegmentation where every system is on its own subnet. So, we often get asked, what is the right amount of microsegmentation? And unfortunately, it really depends. There's some great strategies. Keep your servers together, keep your endpoints together, keep other things together. But I just, in general, don't think it's quite that simple.
Yeah.
What I generally try to articulate is the right amount of microsegmentation is you're trying to prevent an attacker from being able to do recon where they don't need to do recon. Mm-hmm. So where your systems don't need to connect, they shouldn't. Mm-hmm. And then that's really the right amount of microsegmentation. Azure gives us a great ability to be able to do that with network security groups. That we can separate those appropriately and put different business systems together where they need to be. So microsegmentation, I think, is absolutely critical to keeping your network separate so that I can't go in and map your entire network. Yep. But don't get too crazy with it. It's because it really can disrupt a good amount of things.
Yeah, a lot of the just-in-time, just-enough aspects that apply to security apply to just the regular administration of the environment too. Again, trying to create that more resilient environment is taking out that human element. So not having admin rights at all and just deploying a configuration file that deploys everything that you need, the way you need, in the environment that you need. Separating out some of those aspects that, the network segmentation is good from a security perspective, but it's good from a resiliency perspective too. So you're not dependent on like a single subnet or single VNet that has issues and you bring your entire systems down. So
yeah, or leverage a service principal and enterprise application. Yeah, those are great ways to be able to remove a human error from the scenario.
Yeah, so we had a customer that actually was doing a lot of this, but then they were still impacted kind of from a ransomware perspective. And I'll let you walk through this one.
Yeah, this one is also very interesting. This was a Phobos strain, which at the time was actually relatively old. That they got hit with. This organization had backups. They had tested them. They were frequently auditing them. Unfortunately, the systems that did get hit was their entire server stack. And their server stack got hit because they had opened up to their managed services provider, RDP. And then each one of their servers ended up having a public IP address and then opening up RDP to the internet. So it was allowed them to relatively easily deploy what I would consider an older ransomware deployment onto all of their servers. And even though they had audited all of their systems, they had them backed up, the ones that couldn't recover were because they didn't have a backup for that one system. That ended up being their ERP. So it's a pretty big oversight, unfortunately. But in this case, we actually deployed Microsoft Defender for Endpoint on all of their systems and eradicated, recovered, started our resiliency in less than 2 weeks, which is pretty substantial for the size of company that they were and how pervasive it was in all their systems. But they did have to go and deploy manual data entry in order to cover the fact that they hadn't had a legitimate ERP backup. So backups would have solved this problem significantly. Also, default usernames and passwords on systems with RDP open to the internet. But there was, honestly, they thought they had been doing things right, but there was just a significant amount of gaps, and Phobos got in there.
Yeah. And then kind of as we move up the chain, kind of that penultimate environment is that we help customers get to is really where the cloud providers are at. So they're in kind of this fully resilient architecture. There's still some aspect of human element, but the concept of getting to that zero trust operating model. So like there really is no human interaction with the infrastructure anymore. But it's also modifying like how you look at the application architecture. You're not looking at single systems with maybe a relational database that has some redundancy underlying it. You're looking to start to do things about using a distributed data model, something like a NoSQL environment. So there isn't really a single point of failure, and that distributed data is spread out geographically. So in this kind of the penultimate level too, you are looking at geo redundancy and geo distribution. So also getting serverless applications, so you don't have to maintain a particular container for a web app or something like that. You're just triggering events when you need them. The compute is made available by your cloud provider and then used for what you need it. Also starting to get into, Microsoft has this with Azure AD now, concepts about like the distributed ledger for authentication. So again, you're removing single points of failure. So really having a mindset shift on how you think about your application architecture and how you do authentication and separating that stuff out from single points of failure. So one of the things that we've talked about a lot is like you think of firms have a supply chain management system. Well, they have warehouses that are spread across the country. They can handle if a tornado or hurricane hits them, something like that. They shift load, things like that. But the supply chain system itself is a single system that is the point of failure, and it's usually running on some sort of relational database, which has some underlying redundancy. But if you attack the supply chain management system as a whole, then that whole organization is down. So all the redundancy they put in for the warehousing and moving goods around maybe isn't applicable. So that's where you're starting to think about the different application models. And then the other piece is really getting into kind of that sec DevOps too. So we started to do kind of the CI/CD pipelines, DevOps in the previous phases. Here's where you're inserting your security policies as part of that deployment process. So not only do you have infrastructure as code, you have security policies as code, and you're starting to do that automated testing against your security policies, as well as your normal integration and unit testing. So again, there really isn't any human interaction. So you can see kind of the diagram here. We've got a very micro-segmented network, distributed data, things like that. So
one of the things I like to say about Zero Trust is a security-centric IT strategy.
Yeah.
So being able to bring the security mindset forward, but coalescing how the security is going to drive your IT strategy, I think is where it's critical. And when we want to remove the human element, from your applications and from your DevOps. We don't want to remove the human element from your SOC.
No.
What we want to make sure is that those humans are able to do what humans do best, and is put a little bit of judgment into what is happening on from a security level. So putting a really highly qualified SOC analyst with Sentinel gives you a great opportunity to be able to monitor everything that's happened, put a little bit of automation into your SOAR activities, and that's where we would want to see some of the things from a security perspective. But this architecture makes sure that you're putting your human capital in the right places for your infrastructure. So
yeah, it really involves a shift with the security team to be part of that whole technology and application development team. So we actually had a company that we helped deploy this, focus on the security elements, but they had been compromised through one of their systems, and looked at their whole application architecture as a whole and said, we do a high volume of transactions. We need to really rethink how we're approaching our application architecture. So that's where they went to the first thing that says, we're going to do SecDevOps. So we're going to start to automate everything, and we're going to bring in the security policies at the get-go. So they wanted a very elastic, isolated for each individual technology component, very redundant and secure application environment. So it was SecDevOps, and then they said they're going to do end-to-end automation. So everything became infrastructure as code, security policy as code. All of their integration, unit testing, security testing was automated. So if it failed, they just, the developer or the security analyst got a report back of what piece failed at what point, then they would go adjust that in the code. They also really focused on having a very distributed infrastructure. So they focused on North America. So they leveraged multi-cloud for this and multi-geos, but really talking about decentralizing their data, moving to a NoSQL database. So there wasn't a single point of failure. They could lose data centers, regions, any type of aspect. They may have a little bit degraded performance, but they could still function. And even the other thing that they did with that is really focus on the application microservices. So decentralizing kind of single web apps and scaling out each particular service. So again, they were a high volume customer. So this was a key to their aspect. So they wanted to be able to adapt to changing business needs, say on at the holiday season in the United States, new sales, new apps, new things come up, but they wanted to do it securely as well. So, and then also scale on demand. So that was really key to them. So when it wasn't holiday peak season, it's middle of February in the slow season, they're not consuming as many services, and moving that demand to where it was closest to the user. So they also talked, one of their big key strategies that we helped them implement is that microservice and that segmentation. So each technology layer was disposable. So they with this environment, they never actually patched in the traditional sense. They just redeployed. So if there was a security update to, say, a Linux container, they just redeployed the Linux container with the security update to the whole environment, going through the whole process, the integration testing, which catch if there's any application issues that they would vet out before it actually got pushed to production, but not the traditional patch something that's already running. It's just deploy the new secure solution. And they were focused on a cloud native solution, but it still had on-premise for that traditional sense. So excellent.
I think Richard sent us some notes that there are some questions in the Q&A. We could probably.
Yeah, I was just going to summarize for you that, just putting it in the cloud, it doesn't make it resilient, but by architecting it properly, I think that's how we get the solutions to be resilient. And practicing for outages, ensuring your confidence. I'd say we also need to understand that being prepared for where the attacks evolve next, right? As you start moving through your maturity levels, it's really cool. It's good to see. Thank you for sharing these strategies, this solid approach to maturity, and good to know customers can get their help. Please keep continuing to add your questions into the Q&A. We got one or two coming in, and we can reply to those. But otherwise, we can wrap this up. So if you'd like to know more, please reach out to Tim and Jason at these email addresses below. And thank you for your time.